Hello, everybody. My name is Megan Swift. It's my very great pleasure to moderate this session here. You are joining the event that is Sjón in conversation with Peter Stenberg. You can see both of them on your screen. This is a Zoom webinar, so it looks a little bit different than a Zoom call that you probably have gotten very used to in COVID times. So we invite all of those who are joining us in this conversation to, if they would like to, put a question in the Q&A. If you put your cursor towards the bottom of the screen, you'll see that there's a little section that says Q&A, and that's for you to ask questions. And we will see it on the screen, and then at the end of the session, we'll be able to ask those questions. So we're going to have a conversation for about 50 minutes, I think, between Peter and Sjón. It's going to be kind of informal. They have lots of topics that they would like to go through. I'm going to introduce, first of all, our interviewer, who is Peter Stenberg, who is an emeritus professor of Central Eastern and Northern European Studies, or CENES, at the University of British Columbia. And he was head of this department for 10 years. He's published many books, articles, and translations on German and Nordic topics, and he is a fellow of the Alexander von Humboldt Foundation in Berlin and received a one-year fellowship from the Swedish Institute in Stockholm. And you can see that he has a beautiful map of Iceland, the sagas, the Icelandic sagas. In the back there. And it's also my very great pleasure to introduce our interviewee, who is Sjón. And Sjón is one of Iceland's most acclaimed writers. He was telling us before this session began that he was last week in Macedonia. This week he is joining us from Zurich, actually, where he is there for 6 months, I think you said, on a writing retreat or fellowship. He won the Nordic Council's Literary Prize for his novel, The Blue Fox, and the Icelandic Literary Prize for the novel Moonstone, The Boy Who Never Was. His latest novel, Red Milk, addresses the allure of fascism and Neo-Nazism. And as a poet, librettist, and lyricist, he's published 9 poetry collections, written 4 opera libretti and lyrics for various artists. In 2001, he was nominated for an Oscar for his lyrics in the film Dancer in the Dark. And of course, his project that we are most familiar with in 2021 is the film, which is out in Victoria and probably out in Vancouver right now, called Lamb. Seen it? You get it? Yes, we can. I assume you are going to talk about it. Called Lamb, and it's making a big splash in Victoria. And it was perfect timing to come out just before Halloween. Icelandic horror, perfect genre for Halloween time. I would like to thank the Richard and Margaret Beck Lecture Series, which is making this event possible in partnership with UVic Library. And thank you to Matt Huckalak, who is on our screen. He's the very nice drawing that you see at the top there. And I would also like to thank the Icelandic Embassy in Ottawa, and in particular, Ambassador Hlynur Gudjonsson. I have organized this lecture series before, so even though I can't see you, I can't see all the attendees, I know that we have a very nice audience group who regularly attends this lecture series, and I'm so glad you came today. Our next event next semester is going to be, we're sponsoring a film at an Icelandic film for the Victoria Film Festival, so please follow your emails about that. Without further ado, I would like to turn the microphone and the screen over to Peter Stenberg and Sjón to have their conversation, and then I will come back to moderate the Q&A.
So there we are. Can you hear me and see me?
Yes.
Yep. Okay, so we're all ready. Yeah. I guess I should start off and try and drag you into the conversation, and then we'll see that it works easily. Probably nobody here saw the article in the Globe and Mail, Toronto Globe and Mail on Friday, which was on Lancel Meadow, but I thought it would be interesting to bring in the topic of why Icelandic literature, film is coming into it as well now, is and also music, I'd say. But how come a Toronto newspaper would have an almost full-page story on new archaeological findings about Alonso Meadow? And I thought, since that indicated that was something that happened in Canada, they said, which I doubt, 1,000 years ago, I thought we could use Sjón's own title in the middle book of the Codex trilogy to ask his opinion on such things. The question is, why would both a Vancouver or a Toronto newspaper and be interested in such a topic? 1,000 years of Iceland's 1,000 years. Well, you've written about it, and I think your most comical writing, the midsection of Codex. And I wonder if you'd like to say a few things about why Icelandic sagas in particular, but really music and film now too, are so popular. It's a pretty small country with what, 350,000 people or so, and yet the splash that you make on such occasions is more than small. What do you think? Are you influenced by sagas like so many writers are?
Yeah. Well, thank you all for inviting me to this event. I'll start by saying that, and thanks to Helga Thorsson, who got in touch with me first. And yeah, it's great to be here, and it's a difficult starting point that you're bringing to the discussion. I mean, of course, we are incredibly proud of the achievement of our artists and musicians and filmmakers and writers in the world, and it's really a mystery as much to us as the rest of the world how this tiny island, this population of what, 360,000 people, manages to produce such a wealth of artistic contribution to the rest of the world. But let's say it starts with the sagas. I mean, that is of course the origin of the mystery, and because it's a mystery on its own, I don't think we can really get any answers for it from it. So the sagas, they put the ball in motion, and the snowball in motion, and it is this amazing phenomena that for some reason, nobody knows exactly why, but for some reason in the 12th, 13th century, the Icelanders start not only writing, but writing in their own language. And they start writing not only their own stories, the stories of the settlement and how the settlement developed, and the families that settled the country, how they fought out their dominance for the country, and how they came together in the Alþingi, this legislative body from 930. And then, how they came to the conclusion that they should embrace Christianity in the year 1000 and continue. I mean, they started telling these stories, and they started not only telling them, started writing them down in their own language, while the rest of learned Europe was writing more or less in Latin. They decided to write in their own language. And then, as Saxo Grammaticus, the Danish scholar, said, when he was writing in Latin, of course, his amazing work of history, as he pointed out there, the Icelanders were not only interested in their own story, they were interested in the story of the world and the countries around them. So this amazing written culture that starts in medieval times is the foundation for everything we do today. I mean, you will find a lot of Icelandic writers, a lot of Icelandic artists who try to brush it away. You know, I mean, it is a burden as well. It is a burden, I mean. But I think we have to admit that we wouldn't be anywhere in the world without the heritage of the sagas. I always say that they are like our gold reserve. It is because of the sagas that we can claim seat at the table of civilization. So this amazing discovery now that they can actually determine the age of these wooden panels or whatever you call it there in Canada, more or less to the years that the Icelandic saga about the attempted settlement on the continent in the West. You know, they can date it more or less accurately to the years they claim that the Icelanders and the Greenlanders were there. That is, of course, amazing. And of course, we wouldn't have that story without the sagas. And for me, there is poetic beauty in this. The dating technique comes from detecting solar storms, if I'm right, in the wood. Yeah. And of course, we know that solar storms not only make it possible to determine the age of wood 1,000 years later, solar storms create aurora borealis. So we can also have like the image of a spectacular northern lights. At the same time, they were building those buildings there on your shores.
Well, maybe I could add in that have you been to Lonsel Meadow?
No, I have never been there. Not in this life.
It is, I must say, a spectacular contribution of the Canadian government to history, because they've dug it all up. Then you can go in the longhouse. It's not the original one, but some of the original foundations are there. And they make it into a bit of a tourist attraction by actually having musicians come out and sing songs from the place and everything. But it's a very nice museum there, and it's a revered part of Canadian history. And we got to say that's in the northern tip of Newfoundland. It's about as far as you can go before you get off into the Arctic islands, and it's a spectacular place, well maintained by a government which sometimes has the reputation of not doing such things with important places. Anyhow, that's Lonsel Meadow, and what he was saying on the discoveries that they can now do is what was reported there in the Globe, and it is very exciting. So anyhow, enough of the archaeological talk. We'll never get to the books that we really want to talk about. But if we just add a little bit about the manuscripts, they are absolute important documents for the world, and it's treated that way. The Danes and the Icelanders fought over, is that the right word, or argued about that for a long time. It reminds you to some extent about Indigenous relations in Canada, where items that were done by Icelandic monks, for the most part, are being. Germans have the same problem these days, actually, demanding to be replaced, put back into the original place where they were written by the Icelanders, and I think now the Danes have given up, haven't they?
Yeah, I mean,
when I was first in Denmark, they happened to hit it. Not in Denmark, in Iceland. They happened to hit it on a day when a Danish warship came in and delivered the first of the manuscripts. Are they done delivering them?
No, they've kept some of them, and I think we have allowed them, you know, there was an agreement that they would keep some of them, because let's face it, without the Danish king acquiring these manuscripts originally, most of them would have been lost, I think, because at the time the Icelanders had no interest in them. So I think the reason they are still here and that we could reclaim them was that they were around because the Danish king and his scholars, who were Icelanders, took good care of them for us for centuries.
So you thank them.
Yeah, I think, and the strange thing is that, I mean, in the discussion about returning original artifacts and cultural treasures to the original owners, the Icelandic story is not all in our favor. That's the usual thing with the Icelanders. So actually, when the Icelanders started asking for the manuscripts back, it turned out that the king had actually receipts for payment of most of them. So it was the Icelandic elite who should have kept them and preserved them. They sold them, probably to be able to buy some nice clothes and candy in the 17th century.
Yeah. It sounds so much like the situations we have in Canada, or in British Columbia at least, about coastal natives and their objects. I have a very good friend who belongs to the New Channel band. There's a chief there, actually. And he's the guy who invited us to the potlatches that we were involved with over on Point Alberni. But he also said, we can't reclaim the things that were sold as tourist places by our people, since we had the receipts that they are really owned by somebody who paid for them.
Yeah,
it's the ones that weren't paid for and were taken that we want back, right? It's true now with the Germans in Southwest Africa. They have to return. They are going to have to return. Thousands of objects.
As they should.
Anyhow, enough of that. I thought that what I could make here is the jump from those wonderful sagas. We actually taught Old Norse at UBC up until about 15 years ago. The guy who taught it is still there, but they no longer teach it. But I took the course. I sat in on that and learned a bit of Old Norse. Doesn't help you a great deal in the long run for understanding the sagas, but it helps you to translate from German or in English into an area that you can really understand if you know the Scandinavian languages a bit. So anyhow, I thought we could, move on to talking about authors who use either the story of the settlement of in North America at Lansamero, which is based on sagas that were the Vinland sagas that were actually. I knew the lady who was on the boat, Norwegian, who which followed the route that was put out in the sagas and came down through Baffin Island and they were from Greenland, Baffin Island, and eventually ended up in this really remote place of Lansamero. So there's a lot to be marveled at when you read these things or look at them. But did you actually use any saga material in any of your books? Iceland's 1,000 years is full of terrific stuff, but I'm trying to think of whether you sat down with the Vinland sagas and wondered if you use it.
I think it's more that they're always at the back of my mind, and sometimes there are patterns, narrative patterns that that I can pull from there and into my stories, or just the way they present dialogue. I mean, I have been influenced by them on so many different levels. But I would say that the big influence on me is how the writers of the sagas always present the world they're describing on all the levels of possible human perception. So you have the realist foundation for the stories, and into that landscape, you know, of the real, you without hesitation you bring in elements that in in many Western literary traditions, especially later ones, would classify as the supernatural or something that belongs to a different world. But in the sagas, you present dreams, you present mound dwellers, which are, let's say, deceased chiefs or warriors who are buried in burial mounds, you know, and of course they can come alive inside those mounds, and the best of them not only are fierce defenders of the mounds, but they also recite poetry in the night. So if you're close to a burial mound in the night, you might hear a voice coming from inside the mound reciting poetry. And you know, there are visions of writers in the sky, and all of this belongs to the same world. There is not a barrier between these different perceptions of what the world can be. And then, of course, into that realist frame that is also teeming with all these beings and events, then you also bring poetry, because there is no saga without poetry. And there is no saga hero who can't write, let's say, or compose amazing poetry on the spot, at the hour of death. You know, poetry gets produced. And the poetry is where all of these things come together. So the poet in need, or in need, produces poetry, composes poetry, a stanza, maybe because he is dying, or maybe he needs to insult someone, or just he's just memorizing about a past heroic deed. In these poems, as you know, I mean, they use the Cunnings, this an amazing system of metaphors. And one of the admirers of the Kenningar, as we say, was of course Jorge Luis Borges, who wrote about them. But Kenningar is this amazing system of metaphors where you bring together, where you describe things and elements by bringing together different other things, and you combine them in a way that creates a metaphor. And these metaphors, they always refer to the mythologies. They refer to the world of the gods, Odin and Thor and Loki and Freya and Idun and all these amazing beings. So in the poems, the world of man and the world of the gods comes together in the Kenningar, in the Cunnings. So you have all of this in the sagas, and I think you can see in my novels that they are usually opportunities for me to bring everything into the same frame. I call it a novel, but I'm using the opportunity to write poetry, to write anecdotes, to create a little bit of historical fiction here, bring something in from a biblical text to religious text there. So I really learned a lot from the saga writers. And I think that even when I'm definitely not writing anything saga related at all, I am really, really a disciple of their workshops.
The more you talk, the more you sound like you belong to Newcastle. It's the same kind of argument you certainly get from natives on the west coast of Vancouver Island, of British Columbia. Should come over sometime and Yeah, good. Yeah, so I think we probably should get on to discussion of your books. But there is a blank spot in what I know about your writing that I thought maybe you could say a few words about, and that is that you had 9 poetry books that you're talking about, which you call surrealist poetry, and which you sort of abandoned. Is that correct?
Yeah, I started off as a poet. You know, I started my writing life as a teenage surrealist. So when I was 15, I discovered the Icelandic modernist generation. It was a generation of poets who in Iceland were called the atom poets because they come into being at the same time as the atom bomb. They never liked this. They never liked this moniker, but you know, we know them as the atom poets. And in a way, they were like, you know, an atomic bomb in Icelandic literature. Icelandic poetry was changed almost overnight when they stepped forward. And I discovered their poems when I was 15. I discovered it only then because at the time they were still seen as unfit for the curriculum in our schools. They were too daring. They were still too much of iconoclasts. But I discovered them by coincidence, and I immediately was taken by their amazing use of language. And at the age of 15, lines like "The black car that stops in the clearing rests its hot wheels and takes on the shape of a giant beetle." You know, I mean, come on. You know, there were strange metaphors, and I had never seen anything like it in any of the poetry that I had read up to that point. The only strange poetry I knew at the time was the lyrics of David Bowie that were very experimental, and he was using cut-up techniques from William Burroughs and the Beats, and many strange lines were produced that way. So when I discovered the Icelandic modernist poetry, I not only discovered that a license for this way of working with words was available in the Icelandic language, but when I started digging a little bit deeper into it, I came across a book of translations of international poetry that was made by some of the most prominent atom poets. And in that book, I discovered the surrealist poetry of the André Breton and Paul Éluard and Tristan Tzara, and also the Czech surrealists, Vítislav Něsval and Konstantin Bieb. And when it came together, these two elements came together, the original poetry of the atom poets and the surrealist poetry that they had translated. You know, my brain, my vulnerable teenage brain could only react by starting to produce something that, looked and sounded the same. So all of a sudden I was writing surrealist poetry, and I kept at it for years. But, you know, I grew up, and other influences came into the mix. And today I would not say that I'm a surrealist poet, but my roots as a writer are definitely in surrealist poetry. And I think one of the things that I do in most of my books is that on a smaller or larger scale, I bring in different realities. I bring in different elements, and I do my best to make them coexist on the page. It can be two different times that meet in the text, or it can be two completely different ways of thinking. Whatever it is. In my surrealist days, I learned that you can create these strange ornaments made up of impossible things, and they create one amazing, crazy little thing together.
If you have dialogue in your works, in your written works, they're usually going to be short, and I wondered whether that is a a saga technique of some sort, to not have people give big speeches, but to keep it close to the ground. But the description of surrealist styles, which you enjoy or have used, etc., does include. I wondered whether the terrific jumps that your stories make in plot, Blue Fox, which we'll get to in a second, is a perfect example of it. Without any introduction whatsoever at all, you move into a different story completely, which you bring together at the end in an extraordinary way. I wonder whether that isn't somewhat surrealistic on its own, not feeling that you should bridge gaps that you don't care about in the book you're writing. Is the Blue Fox an example of a surrealist story? It certainly is an example of a magical animal story.
Yes.
Yeah.
I mean, the magic realism of Latin America.
Sure.
When it was introduced in Iceland in the mid 70s, late 70s, what we said was, well, thank you for reminding us that magic realism was invented in the Icelandic sagas, and like in the sagas, you don't take much time up by bridging things or describing things or preparing the reader too much for what happens. You just pull the reader into your story and into the situation, and it might come from there, but it might also come from the avant-garde, where you just say to the reader, take it or leave it. I mean, if you give up on page 8, please go and read something else, but if you stay with me until page 88, that's when you're really going to be tried as a reader, And if you survive page 88, a more challenge will be awaiting for you on page 167 or whatever, So I mean, I think the let's say the directness of the avant-garde and of surrealism, that is something that has stayed with me. But I learned from all of this, and the Blue Fox is a very good example of this, because, as you say, I use quite, let's say, I definitely do not use the technique of the folk story or the 19th century European retelling of the folk story, or the pastorale, or the winter novella, or whatever. In the Blue Fox, I'm really playing with what the avant-garde or the experimental novel had brought into being. And I think, again, I'm working in the Icelandic tradition when I am using the latest techniques to reinvent the heritage, to reinvent what has come to me down through the ages, And the Icelanders, that is what has kept Icelandic literature alive through the centuries. It is that writers were always curious about new literary techniques, and they always used them to retell the old stories, to rediscover the old stories, what is in there. And so you know, I just bring the reader in, and if the reader resists, let the reader resist.
That's it. Get tough with them. Yeah. I should mention, maybe as an aside, that there's a friend of mine, a chap down the hall here, who thinks that he was part of the Surrealist movement in Iceland, and left Iceland and is now teaching at Douglas College and writing in English. So I haven't read his English stuff, but his name is Wilhelm Emilsson. No?
I know the name, yeah.
He lives down the street.
Okay, yeah.
Not far away. Yeah. Well, I thought we'd better get on to a story like The Blue Fox. What I have planned, if that's the way to put it, is to try and deal with as many of the books and novels that you've written. Novels are often not the right word for them too, I'm sure. But The Blue Fox is the first one that is translated into English, I think. Is that correct?
Yeah.
And wins the literary, the Nordic Council Literary Prize. And is extremely successful for a first-time translation into English. And when I think about what you said now about the influence of sagas and magic realist animals, etc., it strikes me that The Blue Fox is a perfect example of a lot of it. You leave out gaping holes in the plot when a guy who's been caught in a 4-day-long avalanche suddenly disappears, and you're on a shipwreck, Danish merchant shipwreck, and a whole different story comes out, which comes together to some extent at the end, but that's not the point of the whole thing. Transformation is the point of a lot of your works, and certainly the transformation scenes of in The Blue Fox and others are really, which you remember, and you don't need the pages of explanation that go along with the psychological presentation of it. They're not there, so you better not want to see them. But The Blue Fox itself, let's talk a little bit about it. Question: why is that maybe the most successful of any Icelandic novel? I wouldn't overdo that now. It's written in 2004, and it has a story which goes back into into earlier years. What makes the Blue Fox so compelling? It's 1883. It's something you could say it is a historical novel of sorts. The shipwreck is presented that way, etc. But it's the fox that interests me in a way. That's a fox. Foxes are tricky animals. People like Goethe wrote nice things, Reinecker Fuchs, about that. I think that's a Dutch story, actually, original. But why are the foxes so pleasing to put on the page? I have a suggestion of a work that I bet you know, since you've been involved with opera and things, that remind you so much of The Blue Fox, and that's Leo Janáček's The Cunning Little Vixen, the Schlau Fixland. You know it?
Of course.
It's a very similar plot in some ways to the Blue Fox. I won't go into the plot exactly, but it is about a vixen who is shot by a poacher after a while. It's got great music throughout, and in the end, it doesn't end tragically because the fox has gotten killed, but sort of positively because she's had children, and the children come out at the end. The kits come out and say that, and the forest it does as well. That it's a wonderful world despite all of the shooting and killing, etc. Did you have the Janáček opera in the back of your mind when you wrote The Blue Fox?
I think the fact that the fox in The Blue Fox is a vixen.
Yeah.
It's a female fox.
Is
an homage to The Cunning Little Vixen. So the cunning little vixen was definitely at the back of my mind, when I was discovering the character and nature of the fox in my book, because she is definitely a cunning little vixen. The fox is so pleasing as an animal in fiction, because it is so small, but at the same time it's so clever, and it really challenges the human being. And the Arctic fox in Iceland, I'm told that the Arctic fox in Iceland is a special case, because it is the only one of, let's say it's at least one of the few examples where the Arctic fox, which is of course not the same as the European red fox, where it lives in such proximity to the human being. Mm-hmm. So the fox learns so much and so fast what the human being is and how it behaves, and it adapts so well and cleverly to it. And in Iceland, when I grew up, the fox was absolutely hated. It was seen as a vermin, and there was a governmentally sponsored attempt to exterminate the fox. So farmers were, of course, paid by the tail, So there were special fox hunters who went out and they tried to kill every living fox in the county, and it was really despised, and it was reviled, and in poetry and nursery rhymes, you have the fox always as this ultimate evil creature of the country. And the thing is that when man arrived in Iceland, the fox was king. The fox was the biggest land animal, biggest land mammal in the country, because there are only two mammals native to the country. It's the fox and the field mouse. And of course, the fox, I'm sure, saw the field mouse as a gift from the gods, for him to enjoy. And so when man came to Iceland in the 9th century, fox was there, and fox had been there for I think 300,000 years. And fox was not happy to see man arrive, and started to, the Icelanders believed that the fox was really trying to exterminate them. Yeah. And we have so many crazy stories told by farmers about the cleverness of the fox. And in my research for the book, I read anthropological studies about the fox hunters, and the fox hunters were telling amazing tales about their dealings with the fox, how the fox really tried to get into their minds and to make them kill themselves out in the mountains and in the cold, to take the fox, got into their minds and tried to get them to take off their clothes in the freezing cold, and were doing all sorts of crazy things. And the farmers were constantly counting. They were constantly using their grasp of mathematics to count. I mean, if we have one pair of foxes now, they mate and they have 4 cubs. The cubs are maybe 2 males and 2 females. Next year, they will have 2. And then they will have so they were always multiplying the foxes. And there's a fantastic illustration in one book. In one book I found about the Icelandic fox, and which was obviously about how to get rid of the thing, where they had made a beautiful drawing of a mountain, and it was like a horde of foxes swarming down the mountainside into the valley to get rid of the humans and their sheep. So, I mean, how can you not love this animal and be on its side when it's been given your countrymen such hassle?
But what I didn't know until I read up on the blue foxes, there is a special race of blue foxes as well, which are particularly rare in Iceland. But I thought that was a made up creature by you, but it actually exists, the blue fox.
You know, everything in my books is true.
All right, I'll remember that. Yeah. In any case, it's a wonderful book, The Blue Fox, and transformation goes on in that one as well. In particular, in that one, as the events that take place in the second part of it become reality. Won't go into them, but you should read that book to get a feeling of how you can just change topics and make your point and bring the two back together again. But there are several other books we got to get through, and I see we don't have that much time. Usually the Blue Fox, well, I won't say usually, but I bought the three of them together at the Writers' Festival where I met you. And the other two are also very successful. They're all, well, two of them are short. I think they don't cost much, and they tell interesting stories. That's In the Mouth of the Whale and the Wandering Muse. That's a particular, I just can't go into the details on these two other ones that go with it, but the Wandering Muse, if you don't know it at all, should pique your interest when you find out that it's the story of another Danish ship, which is on its way to the Black Sea, and gets a crewman that invites a guy to come along who's Icelandic. And so he gets the great opportunity to go on a ship that happens to follow the route of the Argonauts. And suddenly you're getting the story of Jason and the Argonauts because one of the crew is a disguised god. I think that's the way you're supposed to put it. And every evening after doing his job as second mate, he sits down and tells stories about the Argonauts. A fantastic idea to get away with it, but there should be a film made of that one. I'd like to see it. Yeah, so those two works have been very successful, and then come the ones that we really want to get to before it's too late. In the Mouth of the Whale and Wandering Muse, but then comes the Whispering Muse. Then comes Moonstone, not too much after all these things, written in 2000, published first in 2016. Moonstone is the most, I don't know, maybe the most extraordinary of the novels, partly because of the way history has gone. It's the story, if you don't know it, the story of the Spanish flu hitting the remote city, I mean, remote Reykjavik, and overwhelming the population because they have no idea what they can do to save people. People are dying all over the place. It's Reykjavik in 1918. You seem to be moving closer to the 21st century and these dates on these things. Yeah, well, one of them just takes place in the 1600s. That's the other one, the Whispering Muse, the Mouth of the Whale. But anyhow, Moonstone is really a very memorable book because of its unbelievable bad luck of predicting almost an epidemic, which we're now living in here, but also dealing with the AIDS epidemic which is 10 years earlier, and the epidemic where the world of death and an inability of the population to really do anything except try and get through it. Yeah, is the central story. Is also a story of transformation as a kid who is a young boy who is, it's called Moonstone, the boy who never was. That's also the Icelandic subtitle, is it? Yep. Yeah, and that kid is completely isolated and has become a figure of total isolation. while living in Reykjavik. His father has died. His father seemed to die a lot in Icelandic stories of alcoholism, which also happens to be quite common in all the Scandinavian novels. But that kid cannot deal easily with the world because his homosexuality makes him an outcast from everywhere except those who know about it, and there's they have a place where they can meet and that kind of thing. And then an event happens which completely changes his world as he's sitting around not helping when the pandemic when pandemic victims come in, and somebody says to him, I don't think we even know who it is. He said, "You there? And you're going to just sit around and mope around, do nothing, or are you going to come out and help us? People are dying." And it changes everything he does from then on. And he becomes a salvation guy. He goes out and takes a great risks and is very, very helpful in dealing with the dying people of Reykjavik. Something else happens in one of the funniest parts of it. That is when the Danish, they come and celebrate the fact that the Danes have given them some, I forget what it is actually. They're celebrating a
sovereign. Yeah.
That's the independence of, it's not the full independence of Iceland, because that doesn't come until 1943 or something.
Yeah. We became a sovereign country in 1918. So but that was at the end of the epidemic. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. And I won't tell you the tremendous story of what happens at the end of that trip. But the kid ends up in England because he's been sent into exile because he's homosexual. And the actual scenes of them discovering that and what they're going to do about it, because it's illegal completely there, are just wonderful. You gotta have real Galgenhumor, you say in German, gallows humor, as somebody comes breaking into the place where they're servicing each other. The young kid who's now 17 or 18, and a Danish crew member, who I don't know how old he is, but they're not supposed to be doing what they're doing, and they catch him at it. And normally the kid would be sent into prison, and the Dane would be, I don't know what would happen to him, the Danish sailor. But they decide not to do that. They can't do that because it's a celebration of Danish victory and all of that. And so instead of throwing the guy in jail, they send him into exile, and he ends up in at the end, 10 years later, he's leading a relatively stable life in England. It's a great story, and sometimes you think, how can I be laughing at this part? But that's really a funny story. Anyhow, that's the Moonstone, the boy who never was. And it gives us not much time, but we got to talk about Red Milk, the latest one, which has a different title in Icelandic. What is the title? It's in a gray. Well, the Icelandic. If I translate the Icelandic title directly, it would be like corn, gold hair, gray eyes. Yeah, and that's a description of the body that's found at the.
Yeah. It's like at the beginning of the story, a young man, 24 years old, is found dead in a railway carriage in England. And the policeman who one of the detectives who comes to inspect the scene, he takes notes and he writes about the young man, corn, gold hair, gray eyes.
Right.
And that was the title in Icelandic. But for several reasons, the East English publisher and the US publisher, they decided on Red Milk, which is fine by me. But let me just say, before we go further, that of course none of these books would be available to English readers if it wasn't for Victoria Cribb, my
wonderful translator. Yep. Yeah. I felt like I should mention her as well, but I didn't think it was my place to do that. That's a really good translation, and you can see how difficult some of the translations are. For instance, in the language test that has been given to the the Moonstone, I think it's in Moonstone. They find out, new people coming in find out that they have, no, that's not in Moonstone, it's in
Oh
Cunning.
yeah, it's in Iceland's 1,000 years. Yeah.
Yeah, that the guys who come in, which includes a guy who seems to be from the Golem, he makes creatures out of clay, one of whom comes to life. Fantastic story. But when the one thing that that guy who makes the Golem is scared of, everything else he's not scared, but he's scared of the language test that he has to pass in order to become an Icelander, right? And that's very, very funny again, although it comes at a desperate point for the guy, really. Yeah. But anyhow, to get back to the red milk, this is very different from any of your other stories, I think, because it's political. It's really a political story about the rise of neo-Nazis. And it has, I would say, it's not there's not much stuff to be laughed at in it, because I think you're quite serious about not liking these guys who are now in the book in the early 1960s formed the Nazi Clique. The way the Nazi clique got together is funny, bicycle clubs and things like that. You wonder, how could these guys ever take on the Germans or something? That's not going to happen. But it does it in a way which is also fragmented, and you find out that there's a dead body been found right at the beginning of the whole novel. And you don't, I'm afraid that at the end of that novel, I still don't know what the guy died of. Maybe you know, but there are those who think he died of cancer because he's dying on the train. There are others that think two guys dressed in black who go running away from the train must have done it. But I've heard both sides of that one. Who did it?
Well, I think life did it. So I mean, he dies of cancer. He uses his last breath, his the last strength left in his ailing body. He uses it to try to reach this meeting in the Cotswolds, where they are founding the World Union of National Socialists.
Right.
And I have been looking for the story in this story for quite a long time. When I realized that it was really like an anti-hero is not the right word for it, because there is nothing heroic about him. But I realized that his story was the reverse of the heroic story. When someone is using the last strength left in his body to become the founder of a world union of national socialists, it is a mission that is quite foreign, I think, to most of us.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I hope so. So when I realized that I had a main character who went on this journey of becoming a leader in this tiny neo-Nazi cell in Iceland, believing that he was destined for glory that way, and that he would find the glory in his relationship with the international movement of neo-Nazis.
Including real people, right? Like Rockwell. Real historical figures are in the story.
Yeah, Savitri Devi, who is like the grandmother of the neo-Nazi movement, and then George Lincoln Rockwell, who is like the granddaddy, perhaps, or even the father of the neo-Nazi movement as we know it. When I realized that this young man, of course, considered his journey a hero's journey, and that he was really like in the old war movies where you have someone crawling up that hill and planting the flag, I mean, that was what he felt he was doing. And I realized that if I would take that journey with him and try to stay as much as possible away from judging his actions and ideas, I might be able to recreate it. But the big challenge of the book was to do that, to somehow stay neutral. To stay neutral, because everything that I had read about the neo-Nazi movement, and every time you see something about them in the news, they are always depicted as monsters or clowns or monstrous clowns. You see the skinheads shouting in the street. They've tattooed, and excuse the language, fuck off, backwards on their foreheads, because they didn't realize it was backwards when they were doing it in front of the mirror. And you've got all these, idiotic images of grunting skinheads, and then you have some guys in suits, trying to hide their old swastika tattoos, and things like that, pulling up the collar so you don't see the edge of the swastika here. But I thought, if we really try to understand where this comes from, we have to start by admitting that these people, they are a part of us. They come from families like us. They come from the same society we do, and for some reason they go on this journey. And in the book Red Milk, we see how this guy is almost, is nudged from a young age. There are elements in his life, in the society he's growing up in, which is Iceland, post Second World War Iceland. We see that the Nazi elements are still there, and he is being nudged slowly. He's being nudged here and there. Circumstances, sometimes coincidences, move him into the place of becoming a neo-Nazi leader. And I found it interesting to see how someone normal gets on that track. Because we all start as normal people. We all start as beautiful little kids, and you can't go into the nursery and point out, okay, there's the neo-Nazi, there's the surrealist, there's the scholar, future professor of Germanic and Nordic literature, there's the plumber, we all start somehow as beautiful little kids, and then some of us become surrealists and some of us become neo-Nazis. And I really wanted to look that in the face, that fact. And, I think, I wrote an afterword to the English edition of the book. And in the afterword,
could I just interrupt a second? So is that afterword supposed to be part of the novel, or is that really an afterword that's telling us the history of your family? Because I thought when I read the afterword that it was part of the story, right? It was a way of giving more information about the character.
Yeah,
I realized that it probably wasn't. It's the real story.
It is an afterword, but it is, as you say, as you noticed, it's constructed as something that is in direct dialogue with the story, and it continues the story into my own personal story.
Yeah.
And so I was, what was I saying? Yeah. So in the afterwards, I dare to draw comparisons between myself and the main character, because I think when you're working in culture, you're always looking for you're always creating bridges. You're always looking for what you have in common with other people, not what separates you from other people. And if we are going to do that with neo-Nazis as well as other people, then we really have to bring ourselves into the mix. And it's difficult. I think this is the most difficult book I've ever written, because the guy is so unsympathetic. It's such an unsavory story. And that's why it starts with him dead. It was easier to write a story about a dead Nazi than a living one. So I killed him off right in the first chapter, just so it would be easier for me and the reader to go on that journey.
Was that written first? The first chapter written first?
Pretty soon, because, when I started working with the material, it became so difficult. And then I thought, okay, let's kill him.
I'm absolutely loath to interrupt because I'm enjoying this conversation so much, but I feel that it's my duty as the moderator just to remind you very gently that it's 10 after 2, and I have 3 questions in the Q&A. I think probably, Peter, you'll want to ask at least one question about lamb.
Sure.
Okay, and then I'm not in a rush, and this call is not going to end abruptly at 2:30. We can go on longer, but I do want to be mindful that people on this call might have made some plans for later in their afternoon or later in their evening and may not be able to stay much later. So maybe we could have 1 or 2 last questions, and then from you, Peter, and then I'll ask the questions in the Q&A. And just to remind everybody who's on this call, this is the only way to get your question to Sjón. If you would like him to answer a question from you in the audience, you go down to this tab at the bottom and you just type your question in the one that's called Q&A, and then I read it out. There's no function where you can ask your question live, as it were. So we would love to hear from you. If you have a question, I'll be happy to read it out, but maybe now is a good time to do that.
You mean, should I ask a question now?
No, I'm just encouraging people in the audience, if they have questions, to while you're asking your last live 2 questions, we get to hear your voice, but everybody else in the audience, they have to type. So.
Oh, I see. Okay. Yeah. So should I ask one now?
Yes, I think so.
Okay, because I do have at the bottom of my thing, how about Lamb, which played in Vancouver, unbelievably, and is now playing in Victoria. A rare event in cinema stuff these days. But we managed to run over to the Park Theatre and see Lamb. Extraordinary film, of course. I don't know, we like all your commentary on films. They show up in some of your books, your interest in films. And I know you must have been involved with some other films other than Lamb, is that right? Earlier. There were films made of sagas, right? Which I remember seeing, and they were pretty exciting for the most part. I don't know whether you were in on any of them.
Not yet, but next year next year we'll see the premiere of a film that I actually wrote with an American director called Robert Eggers. It's a film called The Northmen. And it is a story based on the original Amleth tale. So it is a new saga. It's the lost saga of Amleth, a Viking story taking place in 914. So that is coming to the theaters next year. Oh. But Lamb is, I've written few films before, but I can say that Lamb is the first film that I take part in where I feel absolutely, where I feel that I have been absolutely been allowed to do my thing. And as you know, as maybe some of the people at this event know, that it's a tale about a couple living in a remote valley in Iceland, sheep farmers in our contemporary times, more or less, I think. And one spring, in the lambing season, a surprising creature is born. And they take this creature on as their own child and start bringing it up. And we know, because we have seen the beginning of the film, if we are in the theater or in front of our screen, that something came from the highlands, from the blizzard, bringing this strange gift maybe to the farm. And it's possible that nature is not too satisfied with the way the farmers are dealing with this little creature. And it's a folk story. We call it a folk story because we use the elements of the folk story in it. And we talked about that earlier, how you take the supernatural or the strange as given. If you're in the mindset of the, I mean, you've been referring to the people of the West Coast and how they react to things that nature brings. And I think that in this story, we deal with the reality of this creature that is half human, half lamb. They deal with it as something that appears there naturally, and they just have to engage with it as they would engage with a real thing. Is that, I'm not explaining anything, I hope, but does this answer anything? But this is lamb.
Well, my wife came, she knew what it was all about, she said. I guess we shouldn't say what happens at the end of it. You have to go buy a ticket and see the end of it.
Yeah.
But her is perfectly clear. It's a woman who can't have children. She manages to save a lamb that probably wouldn't survive if she didn't take it over with nursing, basically, and therefore, the scene which really shocks you, although it's kind of funny in its way, is when the lamb first shows up in different form, basically, and where theater I was in, they were all laughing at that as if it's a big comedy. She said, well, this is the story of a woman who has managed to get her own child without having born it because she can't. And it all seems correct there. And the end of it is the return of a family patriarch to take back a member of the family that has been kidnapped.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's right.
Yeah. And this when you come into the story, and just like in my books, you just enter the story. There are no explanations given. You just come into the story and you sense that this couple, these two farmers, that they are living with grief. They found a way of surviving together, and it's possible that they have lost a child. And not only they don't have a child, maybe because they've lost a child and they can't have another child. So what grounds the story and what made it possible for us to tell this strange story was to make the emotional journey of the main characters as real as possible. And the actors, they do an amazing job of embodying that grief and everything that comes with it. And of course, the real mother of that lamb creature, she wants it back, and she becomes like this Greek chorus, this strange bleating Greek chorus, constantly reminding the woman of the farm that she's taken something that's not her. And the presence of that sheep, that ewe, keeps the clock of the tragedy ticking.
It ticks to the very end, I'll say that. Yeah. Well, I don't know what I'm supposed to do now. Should I pass it on to the.
I think we better go into the question and answer period here because we have some questions that are emerging, and I want to thank you very much, Peter, and Sjón for that wonderful conversation. It's such a lovely way to spend a Sunday afternoon listening to this intelligent conversation about art and inspiration and these works through that Sjón has created over the years. I really, really enjoyed it. I'm going to read out some of the questions now that are coming in from our audience. So the first one is from Eric Stenberg. He says, what does Sjón think of the US and British invasion of Iceland during World War II? Was it invaded to prevent Germany from occupying it? And why did Greenland not suffer that same fate?
My son.
Yes. Yeah.
We start with an historical question, and there's some.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think we know that the Brits they invaded Iceland to get there first, because the Germans definitely had plans to come there and to make Iceland their base in the North Atlantic. And without the Brits invading and occupying Iceland, the Germans would most likely have done that, and we would have suffered the same fate as the Norwegians and others, because wherever they went, they came with much cruelty. And it would have changed the course of the war as well, because it would have made they would have established a submarine base there. So I think the War of the Atlantic would have at least gone for much, much longer if the Brits had not come there. It was a friendly occupation. It must be said that the people of Reykjavik, when they realized it was the Brits and not the Germans, they were really relieved, you know. And we have many strange comic stories actually about the first day of the occupation, because they came sailing into the harbor of Reykjavik, and the people of Reykjavik just flocked down to the harbor, the kids, the workers, you know, everybody just came down to the harbor to see what was happening, you know, and the troops came ashore. And the story goes that the troops, they didn't have any plans for how to get around. So somebody said, so what are you doing? I mean, don't you have to go somewhere? And they said, yeah, we have to put up like bases or posts all around Reykjavik, you know. And somebody said, okay, I know a guy who can take you there. So he called his lorry driver friend who took part of the troops there. And then it was like a big bonanza, because every car in Reykjavik, every free car in Reykjavik came and brought the Brits to their places, the strategic places, and they made them pay, you know. So the Brits had to pay taxis for taking them to their posts and everything. It's a ridiculous story. And that was the beginning of a beautiful friendship, because they had to pay for every move the Icelanders made on their behalf for the rest of the occupation.
So it was an expensive invasion.
It was an expensive invasion for the Brits, yeah.
Sjón, that sounds like a really incredible early version of the musical Come From Away. And I propose that for a future project. You could write a Broadway musical, the British invasion.
Yeah. Was the American invasion considered to be different? I mean, by the local population?
Yeah, then, you know, then the Brits handed, you know, the occupation turned into a defense agreement, and then the Americans, the US, took over the defense agreement.
Then you have novels like Atomstation, which criticized the establishment of American bases in Iceland.
Yeah, and I mean, it was seen as a cultural invasion. Yeah, so we really had a strong cultural resistance to the American presence there, more or less to the day they left in 2006. Yeah. But they brought chewing gum and movies and later rock and roll. So why are we complaining?
I just throw in one last statement on this topic. It also brought, for the first time, the ability of the population of Jews to have a quorum so they could hold a synagogue, because the GIs had a number of Jews were there. Before that, they'd never been able to get 10 men together.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
That's a very interesting part of that story.
So we have another question from Kate Craig, who says, what trends do you see, Sjón, in modern Icelandic myth, fable making and storytelling? And are there any avant-garde artists that you are particularly excited about?
Well, there is a growing trend in Icelandic literature to write genre. Genre has not been a part of the literary landscape in Iceland until fairly recently, and I would say that much of the retelling of the mythological elements from our medieval culture, the pagan religion, is going into that part of our literature, and also in music we have melodic metal bands, for example, that are working with the old epic poems and imagery from the poetic Eddas. So it would be more in popular culture that you would see the retelling of sagas and folkloric elements. And avant-garde artists, there are so many. As usual, the Icelandic cultural scene is flourishing, and there are many interesting elements at play at the moment. I would say the big news in Icelandic culture are the new artists coming from the immigrant community, or from the community of foreigners who have moved to Iceland, or people who are second generation immigrants or third generation immigrants. Last year was really the year they stepped forward, and we are really experiencing now that strong voices from the Polish population in Iceland and the Filipino population in Iceland are finding their way in our culture, and it's really something that I cherish and I've been waiting for a long time now.
Great, thank you. We have a question about whether your old alter ego Johnny Triumph is gone forever, or if Johnny Triumph will reemerge, or whether there'll be a return of Johnny Triumph.
Well, you know, the last time Johnny Triumph stepped on stage and played with the Sugar Cubes, I think it was in 2006. He forgot half of the lyrics he was supposed to sing. So I'm afraid that if he would step on stage this time around, he would just stand there speechless. So just as he arrived from the big rock and roll heaven in the sky, he stepped out of a parallel dimension from the rock and roll heaven. I think he must have returned there. I hope so. I'm not sure I have the body for it yet. Still have the body for it, you know. I need to be reborn to go back there.
Okay, we have a question from Bridget Tronrud. You mentioned how much poetry is involved in your novel writing. Do you find that your writing for a visual medium in film can incorporate poetry in the same way, or is it different for you?
The amazing thing about the novel is that you can just put whatever into it whenever you feel like it. That's what I love about the novel. It's so elastic. It's so elastic. You know, you can dump a poem into the middle of the page. You know, well, if that is how you feel about it, you know. But with film, it's interesting how, for a novelist, how restrictive film is as a form when you're writing it. But I think you can bring out the poetic in film by giving into the visual narration, and I think that is what we have in Lamb. Lamb is borderline silent. There is so little dialogue in Lamb. It relies so much on the presence of the characters, the place where they are, the fragments of the reality they're living in, intercut with their daily chores and things like that. So I think film and poetry have a lot in common, and I try to take advantage of that when I'm writing for film. The fact that you can actually create a montage of diverse images to create an atmosphere or something that resembles a stanza in a poem. So definitely poetry is there.
Sjón, were you involved in the score for this film at all?
No, we have a young composer. It's his first feature film score, Tóti Guðnason, and he's doing a marvelous job there. So, you know, yeah.
Great. Okay, we have another question about the novel From the Mouth of the Whale. It's the readers get to experience a strong sense of curiosity from Jónas Pálmason about the magical qualities of the flora and the fauna of Iceland, as well as the country's beauty, especially in summertime. How important would you say is this rediscovery of Iceland's beauty and its nature and landscapes in your writing?
I grow up with the image that the romantic national poets of the 19th century gave us. Nature was seen as a hostile force until then. And it's only when they start taking the steps towards defining ourselves as a nation that should get some kind of an independence, or at least a recognition of our culture and that we are our own culture, that they start like making a pact with nature. And the only way to reclaim the country, or believe that we should reclaim the country from the Danes, was to bring out the beauty of the nature. And that's the image of Iceland that I grow up with, that it is a beautiful place, even though its nature is what can you say, is hostile, you know, is hostile, you know, that there is beauty in that, that it is sublime. It's sublime. The romantic sublime is what we were, what we were given. And yeah, so I use that in my books, you know, and in The Mouth of the Whale, Jónas finds much beauty in the small things in nature, and he believes that we should exist with nature and in nature. His world is his worldview is the holistic view on nature and man, and I believe in that as well.
I think as Canadians, we can fully understand the idea of sublime nature, which is terrifying and beautiful at the same time.
Yes.
So I'm just checking in the chat, and we have some questions in the chat as well. Hold on a second, let me find it here. Okay, so question about from Anna Gunnarsdóttir Gronberg. Red milk reminded me that colors are often of importance for you, Sjón. The blue fox can be a translation problem. I translated the book to Swedish and had some trouble finding how to translate the color of a fox that isn't white. It turned out that there are some dark Arctic foxes in Scandinavia as well, and I learned that they are described as blue in Swedish, English, German, and probably other languages. In Icelandic, they are described as brown or reddish brown. I've met Icelanders in Sweden who are almost angry with me for calling the fox blue instead of brown. Did you have any trouble with the translation, using the term blue fox?
I mean, you know, this word rauður in Icelandic even has the word has red in it, you know, a reddish brown, as Anna says. I'm glad to hear that Anna is here because she's translated my books wonderfully into Swedish, and she translated the Swedish edition of the Blue Fox, and it was on the strength of that translation that I got the Nordic Council's Literature Prize. So I'm glad that Anna is here. Yeah, I mean, you have to. I mean, when your texts are translated, you have to accept that other languages do not have the words that your language has, you know. And the language teacher in Iceland's 1,000 years that Peter referred to before, you know, he would of course say it is because the Icelandic language is the perfect language. And it has words that no other languages have because they are inferior. And I don't know where this color blue comes from when it comes to describing these creatures, the reddish earth brown foxes of Iceland. But I use colors very much in my books. That's right. And Anna knows it because she's been battling with it in many books.
I think we have a question from Palma Bjarnason. If you were to recommend 3 Icelandic books that encapsulate different aspects of the culture, which ones would be on your own personal list? This is that's a tall order. 3 books that would encapsulate different parts of Icelandic culture for you.
Okay, yeah, I mean, of the sagas, I would recommend Grettis Saga. It's the perfect saga, and I actually think the person who wrote it believed he or she, we don't know, was writing the perfect and even the last saga, because you have elements from all the other great sagas in it done perfectly. So I would say Grettis Saga from the saga period, and then I would bring in Guðbergur Bergsson. He is at least for me, and maybe my generation, he is the big author after Halldór Laxness. Halldór Laxness, the Nobel Prize winner from 1955. Guðbergur Bergsson wrote a novel called Tómas Jónsson Bestseller. It is published in the United States, I think, by Open Letter Books. And it is really the most perfect, amazing attack on everything the Icelanders love and cherish in themselves and their culture, and done beautifully and with all the tools of the culture. It is punishing, and it was a much needed punishment when this book was published in Iceland in 1966. So Grettis Saga, Tómas Jónsson bestseller, and what would be the third book? This is always difficult. I think I will mention the Romantic poet Jónas Hallgrímsson from the 19th century, because he's also translated into English. So a collection of Jónas Hallgrímsson, Grettisaga, and Thomas Jónsson bestseller.
Thank you. That's very, very nice. And I also see in the chat that my colleague in Russian studies from UBC, Veta Chidnev, has written that also in Russian folklore, we have the appearance of the fox as very crafty and clever, and the wolf, which you would expect would be the iconic Russian animal, actually appears as more stupid in Russian folklore tales. And I have another colleague, I thought that you might just be interested in this. She did a study of the animal that appears the most in Russian folktales, and it is actually the fox, the one that appears the most. You would think it would be a bear or probably a wolf. The wolf appears quite a bit, but it's the fox that appears the most.
Yes, I'm happy to hear that. You know, foxes of the world unite.
And in Russian, it's also, the word is a feminine noun. So it sounds as if you also specifically picked a vixen. And yeah.
And actually the Icelandic fox, or the Arctic fox in Iceland, the official name is Tova. You know, Tova is a female name, you know, it's a feminine name. So Tova is the word, and Tova is the word I use in the Icelandic edition of the Blue Fox. It's always said Tovan, Tovan, Tovan. It's never said Refur, which is the masculine name of the species. So Tova it is in Iceland as well. Yeah.
Okay, so I think we should probably wrap up our time together, unless you have, Peter, you had something else that you wanted to say. I wanted to thank very much Helga Thorsen, who is my colleague at UVic, who conceived of this session in the first place. And I hope she's here today. I can't see everyone who's here today, but I hope that she is here enjoying it. And I want to thank Sjón so much for coming to visit us from Zurich and bringing us this wonderful afternoon of Icelandic culture, and for Peter for doing this wonderful discussion. I understand from the way that you relate to each other that you have met before, and it's wonderful to see you talking together.
Yeah, it was a great opportunity to see Peter again and continue our conversation, and to share it with all of you. And I really enjoyed this, Megan. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much. So I think that we will say goodbye on this webinar. We have recorded it, and it's possible that we will be able to post it somewhere. If we're able to, I'll keep in touch with our email list, and I'll make it available for anyone who wasn't able to come to today's session. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Hope to see you both in the future somewhere.